Sometimes an R rating isn't enough. Some of these projects started fights with TV networks, and some of them got banned from whole countries. It's pretty extreme stuff, but you can handle it, right?
How far is too far? When it comes to TV, that potentially gross line is always changing. Today, you can find just about every body part and swear word on the small screen at any given time of the day. But there was a time when TV was a bit more conservative. Whether or not they'd be shocking today, here are a few TV moments that took things too far. The CBS sitcom Two Broke Girls follows the exploits of two New York waitresses as they attempt to start their own cupcake business. But many viewers find the pair far from sweet. Complaints sent to the FCC about the show's content included one woman urging the authorities to review an episode that depicts a naked doll being manipulated into quote-unquote graphic sexual acts. Of course, how graphic a Barbie can be without actual genitals is a different question entirely. When Married with Children premiered in 1987, Al, Peg, and the rest of the Bundys weren't the picture-perfect family America was so used to seeing. Al constantly called Peg a horrible housewife, mother, and cook, while Peg was there to let her husband know just how inadequate he was as the man of the house. But it was an episode that took place in a bra shop that was the breaking point for one Michigan woman, Terry Ricolta. The episode compelled her to start a letter-writing campaign encouraging a boycott of the show.
I sent my children out of the room after 5 minutes of this trash, but I'm excited to watch and see what kind of low-class advertisers will support this type of program.
Ricolta's campaign became legitimate news. A few advertisers pulled their ads and at least one episode wasn't aired. But ultimately, the publicity that Ricolta generated for the show is credited for helping it find its audience and stay on the air for 11 seasons. So you have Terry Ricolta to thank for classy jokes like this.
Hey, Bundy! I had steak tonight. What are you having?
If I was the mailman, I'd be having your wife.
Never afraid to push the boundaries of good taste for a laugh, one episode of Seinfeld crossed the line between humor and bigotry, according to Bronx Borough President Fernando Ferrer. He was one of numerous viewers offended by a plotline that saw the main characters caught up in a traffic jam caused by the Puerto Rican Day Parade and desecrating a Puerto Rican flag, causing angry bystanders to toss their car down a stairwell.
You know, it's like this every day in Puerto Rico.
Both the comment and the flag burning provoked outrage, with the National Puerto Rican Coalition calling it an unquestionable insult to the country and demanding an apology from NBC. The network quickly complied. Once accused of anti-Semitism, the Family Guy episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein was temporarily banned on Fox, but eventually aired 4 years after it was originally produced, and after the show had already gone to depths that were arguably far worse. However, the network refused to relent when it came to the season 8 finale, Partial Terms of Endearment. The so-called abortion episode was made but rejected, with both Fox and Adult Swim exercising their right not to air it. Instead, it was released as a standalone DVD and on BBC Three in the UK. Creator Seth MacFarlane saw it as a cop-out aimed at placating conservative viewers, saying, "Times really have changed. The network is making a decision that is, unfortunately, probably based on people's current ability to handle and dissect controversial narratives. It wasn't the first or last time Fox would deal with censorship issues." The classic sci-fi series, The X-Files, also had an episode banned for inappropriate content. Home was the first ever X-Files episode to begin with a viewer discretion warning and remained the only one to carry a TVMA rating, which it probably deserved. The plot follows Mulder and Scully as they investigate a secluded farmhouse after an abandoned baby is found nearby. What they discover are three brothers, the younger two fathered by the eldest, which makes for a very complicated and gross family tree.
When you know know your boy would do anything for his mother.
Fox removed the episode from syndication and only repeated it once as part of a 1999 Halloween special, advertising it as an episode so controversial it's been banned from television for 3 years. While The Simpsons usually takes a more subtle approach to lampooning its targets than shows like Family Guy or South Park, when Springfield's first family poked fun at Brazil, they almost wound up causing a diplomatic incident. The episode Blame It on Lisa saw The Simpsons head to Brazil and face all manners of trouble upon arrival. Homer is kidnapped by a cabbie. He and Bart are mugged by children, and there are rampant monkey attacks.
The drunkenness, the ambiguous sexuality. I've got to get out of here.
The country's president, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, thought it brought a distortion of Brazilian reality to the screen. The Rio Tourism Board agreed, claiming that the $18 million it had recently spent on promoting the city in the States was now wasted. Meanwhile, a little over a decade later, the 2016 Olympics actually verified a few of The Simpsons' claims. When a show portrays a serial killer as a charismatic champion of justice with a pretty sweet Miami life, it's bound to attract a few copycats. In January 2014, 21-year-old Mark Heil was found guilty of murdering his mother after she'd been slashed more than 50 times. Heil's search history featured gems like Dexter's kill knife and what does a sociopath need to do to blend in seamlessly with society. But clearly not how to clear your browser history, you dummy. The event reignited the debate over whether the show should be taken off the air, since it wasn't even the first murder to be blamed on Showtime's crime drama. In 2008, aspiring Canadian filmmaker Mark Twitchell, who had been going under the name Dexter Morgan on Facebook, lured two men to his home under the pretense of making a horror film about a sword-wielding mass murderer. Twitchell killed one of the men, and the other managed to escape. And we can't forget Jessica Lopez, who strangled a woman and attempted to chop her up like the show's protagonist. Some of Britain's greatest exports have been created at the UK's famous Pinewood Studios, but not everything that comes out of the world-renowned studio is guaranteed to be a success.
Heil, honey.
Heil, honey.
Heil, honey.
Heil, honey.
Heil, honey.
Hello.
I'm home.
Heil, Honey, I'm Home was supposed to follow a reimagined version of Adolf Hitler and his partner Eva Braun as they deal with living next door to a Jewish couple. The show, a 1990 spoof of terrible sitcoms, failed right out of the gate.
I'm a very, very bad Hitler.
The now defunct Galaxy Channel was forced to pull the plug after the pilot episode because of accusations of anti-Semitism. Writer Greg Atkinson has always insisted his intentions were misunderstood, saying, "Sometimes you can destroy bullies by laughing at them. This isn't about denying what happened, it's about being human in the face of inhumanity." About a decade later, comedy fans were finally ready to embrace the absurdity of a comedic Hitler. Hooray?
R-rated films are supposed to push your buttons. With freedom to deliver language, blood, nudity, and drug use, you can provide lots of provocative material. In some instances, though, R-rated movies use the creative freedom of their rating for less savory purposes. These are the films that go too far. Every generation gets their own take on the classic story, The Most Dangerous Game. And this generation's incarnation came with The Hunt. This Craig Zobel film concerns a group of people who wake up and find out they're being hunted for sport, like any version of this tale does. The twist this time, though, was the story got filtered through the modern-day political zeitgeist, with the hunters being left-leaning elites, while the victims were coded as conservatives. On paper, it's easy to see how the project received a green light as something that, in the vein of Team America World Police, could generate political discourse while drumming up ticket sales from moviegoers who wanted to be part of the conversation and the dark humor. However, the marketing for The Hunt inspired a wave of unforeseen controversy, largely from right-leaning news organizations. It even garnered an implied response from former President Donald Trump, who accused Hollywood of merely trying to stir up violence. The cause of all the brouhaha was that many saw the hunt as endorsing violence against conservatives, though this seemed to ignore how the conservative characters were the heroes of the movie. Still, the uproar over the hunt had a sizable impact and inspired the film to get delayed a whole 6 months. When it came time for this generation's most dangerous game, perhaps the filmmakers tried to push a few too many buttons. R-rated comedies can sometimes draw flack for getting too racy with certain jokes, but The Interview inspired a whole other level of vitriol. The film about two goofballs getting pressed into assassinating Kim Jong-un drew negative responses from North Korea, especially a scene depicting the leader's gruesome death. In fact, the film was so controversial that it inspired a hack, apparently stemming from North Korea, that leaked countless pieces of sensitive information, all stemming from distributor Sony Pictures. Things got even crazier when the hackers eventually graduated to threatening extreme violence against movie theaters that screened The Interview. The consequences of the film's provocative humor were swift. By mid-December, the movie's theatrical release was largely canned. But that wasn't the end of The Interview. On the contrary, the movie continued to inspire widespread discussion on how to respond when violent threats are made against artists. In the years since its release, The Interview actor and co-director Seth Rogen has been upfront on what a grueling experience it all was. Rogen said to Cinema Blend, "Truthfully, after The Interview, co-director Evan Goldberg and I were a little traumatized, I think. Like many of Rogen's comedies, The Interview was something that could provoke laughs, but was also meant to push buttons. But nobody could have expected the outsized and unprecedented response its material received." The anthology comedy Movie 43 provides more stars than there are in the heavens across its various individual segments. Whereas wall-to-wall crudeness in other comedies can help unearth some kind of deeper truth about humanity, Movie 43 is now widely regarded as one of the worst comedies to ever hit theater screens. The participation of movie stars ranging from Hugh Jackman to Richard Gere to Emma Stone couldn't help elevate the film. The only conversation drummed up by this box office dud was a handful of horrific moments that showed the film's desperation to wring yucks from moviegoers. Movie 43 employed yellowface, incest, and a closing sequence largely focused on physical abuse being hurled at a character played by Elizabeth Banks. Movie 43 embraced the idea of overloading the viewer on shocking material. Though the movie pushed the boundaries of what the R rating would allow, Movie 43 was hollow vulgarity to its very core. Released in 2011, The Hangover Part II drew some heavy criticism for going way too far in its attempts to be funny. For example, many people were outraged when the character of Stu learned that he slept with a transgender woman.
We didn't get married, did we?
Of course not. We just have some fun in the Chardonnay room.
The depiction of this revelation as being disgusting was correctly labeled by many as an example of bro comedies using blatant transphobia as a substitute for actual comedy. Garnering even more media attention at the time was a photo in the end credits. The image parodies an actual photo taken in the Vietnam War of a South Vietnamese general executing a prisoner. The moment was dubbed by critics like Roger Ebert as a desecration of one of the most famous photos to come out of the Vietnam War. Here, fans were disappointed that a movie that was all about shock value crossed over from providing adult-skewing gags into outright disrespect. Zack and Miri Make a Porno is actually a sweet movie when you get right down to it. One about lifelong best friends who may actually have romantic feelings for one another. However, the fact that it had the word porno in its title meant the film already rubbed some moviegoers the wrong way. This was especially true in the movie's marketing, which kicked off with a poster that proved so suggestive that it ended up getting banned from being shown in movie theaters. Sometimes a movie that stirs up this much controversy can ride all the publicity to sizable box office success. Unfortunately, none of these marketing troubles inspired much interest from moviegoers. Released at the very end of October 2008, Zack and Miri Make a Porno ended up sinking without a trace at the box office. The Kevin Smith comedy, despite featuring raunchy scenes like Justin Long as an adult film star listing off the titles of movies he's appeared in, is ultimately a film that wants to tug at your heartstrings. Too bad its marketing garnered a reputation for being all the wrong kinds of boundary pushing. Released in 2007, The Hills Have Eyes 2 is a kind of schlocky horror B-movie that audiences tend to watch because of its tasteless material. Graphic violence especially is a forte of this subgenre. However, this particular horror sequel used its sensibilities not to depict over-the-top violence, but to continue a long tradition of using sexual assault in a throwaway manner. The Hills Have Eyes 2 centers much of its plot on the prospect of deformed mutants capturing human women for the purposes of forced breeding. The movie's emphasis on this element is made apparent in an opening scene, one depicting an unnamed woman trapped in the mutant's basement solely so she can breed children. Before she can establish even the barest personality, she's slaughtered after birthing a stillborn baby. Critics like Scott Tobias took The Hills Have Eyes 2 to task for resorting to such a shallow depiction of sexual assault, as well as for not giving any of the women in the film basic character development. While some grindhouse movies like Abel Ferrara's Ms. 45 have garnered praise for using grimy exploitation cinema to thoughtfully explore the perspective of a sexual assault survivor, the tactless treatment of sexual assault in The Hills Have Eyes 2 is just plain appalling. The 2007 Uwe Boll movie Postal opens with a sequence depicting Flight 11 just moments before it hits the North Tower, beginning the 9/11 terrorist attacks. In this version of the event, the two hijackers piloting the plane decide to abort the mission, only for the passengers to break into the cockpit and inadvertently cause the plane to crash into the tower. A sequence like this was always meant to establish the tasteless, and if the general critical reception is any indicator, humorless aesthetic of the movie ahead. But the film's opening gag was perceived by many as way too provocative, to the point that one of its actors believed it cost the film its commercial potential. In the book My Year of Flops by Nathan Rabin, performer Dave Foley remarked, "I think that crashing a plane into the Twin Towers at the start of the film hurt it. Postal, like its video game source material, wanted to shock and offend, but it seems that it went above and beyond the Call of Duty in its opening sequence, which took things from vulgar comedy to just plain vulgar." This Cuba Gooding Jr. and Horatio Sands story concerns two men who enlist in a singles cruise, only to discover it's exclusively for gay men. They then pose as gay while trying to get closer to women who work on the boat. The comedy is full of jokes about straight men being terrified of the very presence of gay people and how gross the thought of two dudes kissing is. Critics savage the film for its rampant homophobia, though many writers also slam the movie for being too tedious. Rita Kempley of the Washington Post, for example, remarks that the tired and familiar attempts at comedy were just as insulting as the rampant gay panic material, adding that, "It's time many of the movie's more offensive gags went back into the closet." Few films of the 1990s are as controversial as Natural Born Killers, the tale of murderous lovers Mickey and Mallory, played by Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis. Intended by writer and director Oliver Stone as a condemnation of the heavy presence of violence in the media, the general response to the movie is still divided today over whether or not the film achieved its intended goals. Critic Jeanette Marsland, for instance, observed that the movie seems to be more in love with graphic violence and critical of it. Marsland observed, "While Natural Born Killers affects occasional disgust at the lurid world of Mickey and Mallory, it more often seems enamored of their exhilarating freedom." Critics who interpreted the film as being more of a love letter to this kind of behavior saw Natural Born Killers as a lot of ultra-violent noise without much of a purpose. Similarly, much has been written about how the film's treatment of indigenous cultures is almost as stomach-churning as its most gruesome instance of violence. With this 1994 film, Stone meant to make something that inspired a reaction in people. He succeeded, but unfortunately, it inspired a whole lot of critiques that Stone had made something as indulgent as the elements of society he intended to condemn.
You'll never understand, Wayne. You and me, we're not even the same species. I used to be you, then I evolved.
Revenge of the Nerds has often been seen as a film championing the downtrodden, a comedic form of voyeurism wherein the oppressed could live out their greatest fantasies. Now for many, Revenge of the Nerds is seen as trivializing rape culture. This is most apparent in an infamous sequence where the character of Lewis pretends to be the jock Stan so he can sleep with the quarterback's girlfriend, Betty. It's meant to be a cheer-worthy sequence in the movie itself, but it registers to many now as an endorsement of sexual assault. Director Jeff Canoe himself has recently expressed regret over ever including the scene in the film. In 2019, Canoe told GQ, "I've heard criticism a lot this year because of the Me Too movement. At the time, it was considered sort of a switch. It's not excusable. If it were my daughter, I probably wouldn't like it." The R-rated events of Revenge of the Nerds were intended to be seen as conventional escapism, but it's apparent to many now that the movie is more insidious than humorous. In his voyage up the river to find Marlon Brando's Colonel Kurtz, Martin Sheen's Captain Willard sees a wide array of horrific and unforgettable sights that lay the horrors of the Vietnam War bare. Unfortunately, viewers are also exposed to a terrible sight late in the film. For a climactic scene involving a ritual performed by an Ifugao tribe, a water buffalo is killed on screen. This was apparently a real-life practice that was already underway before cameras started rolling, with director Francis Ford Coppola filming the ritual as it occurred. While intended to be a visual parallel to Willard's plan to assassinate Kurt with a machete, the sight of an animal killed on screen is jarring enough to render that thematic undercurrent irrelevant. Decades after the film's release, Coppola has stood by the scene, reaffirming that he was merely documenting reality itself. Coppola said to USA Today, "I did not direct it or anything, that was the way they do it." To prove his point, Coppola made sure to emphasize that he refused to have an extra water buffalo around to kill in case extra takes were needed. Despite Coppola's statements, this scene of animal cruelty stands out in Apocalypse Now as horrifying for all the wrong reasons.
Wolf Creek is the product of unchecked misogyny and a sickening fascination with violence. The movie positions itself as a typical slasher flick about three friends taking a trip through the Australian outback when their car breaks down in Wolf Creek Park. A man named Mick stumbles upon the group and offers to help before revealing himself to be a sadistic killer.
That's not a knife. This is a knife.
The trio of protagonists in Wolf Creek contains one man, but he's sidelined for almost the entirety of the movie until he escapes with his life at the end. Most of the screen time is dedicated to showing Mick torturing the two women in ways that the film seems to find entertaining. After an implied sexual assault, Mick severs limbs and spinal cords while stabbing and shooting to his heart's content. The movie never lets up on showing women in horrendous pain and suffering. Roger Ebert rightfully called out the film for its misogyny, writing, "There is a role for violence in film, but what the hell is the purpose of this sadistic celebration of pain and cruelty? Slashers have their place, but they don't have to be as openly hateful as Wolf Creek." Unfortunately, the visceral nature of these killings might be due to the movie being based on a true story, that of Ivan Milat, the serial killer known as the Backpacker Murderer. A movie with a title like I Spit on Your Grave sets a certain tone for audiences before they even walk into the theater. The film debuted in 1978 with a poster that read, "This woman has just cut, chopped, broken, and burned 5 men beyond recognition, but no jury in America would ever convict her." Aside from the dubious claim about juries, the sentence perfectly sums up the film's fascination with violence. Unfortunately, violence is really the only thing this movie cares to show. The premise sees a woman seeking revenge on 5 men after they sexually assault her, and the weak plot merely serves as a means to string together one horrifying scene after another. The assault that kicks off the movie's revenge plot takes up gratuitous amounts of screen time, and the brutal murders that follow it don't really offer any sense of catharsis. Roger Ebert called the movie a vile bag of garbage and continued by saying, "Attending it was one of the most depressing experiences of my life." The shock factor can carry a movie pretty far though. Decades after its release, I Spit on Your Grave somehow spawned a 2010 remake and multiple sequels, each arguably as upsetting as the original. Sausage Party, the 2016 comedy from the minds of Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, begins with a premise reminiscent of Toy Story. When the lights go out at a local grocery store, the food items come alive. Most of them dream of one day being bought by a customer and taken to the great beyond, but they don't realize they're destined to be eaten alive. Feature-length adult animation with an imaginative concept seems like a promising proposition. On release, the movie generated a ton of buzz, and its critical reception was overwhelmingly positive. Looking back now, it's hard to imagine how the film even earned a release, much less critical praise, considering how heavily it relies on being downright offensive for laughs. The crude sexual humor is rampant, but with a name like Sausage Party, what else would you expect?
You couldn't fit an eggplant in there. It's too big. It'll tear you in half.
However, what's really jarring is just how many racial stereotypes were squeezed into the film. Scene after scene pairs Kareem Abdul-Lavash with Sammy Bagel Jr. and forces them to play out one anti-Muslim or anti-Semitic trope after another. A sentient bottle of Native American liquor is given a cringe-worthy performance by Bill Hader, and the movie's Twinkie character is gay. The list of groups used as punchlines goes on, but the movie really should not. Bucky Larson, born to be a star, really tries its hardest to turn the adult film industry into one interminable running joke, but it really should have channeled its efforts elsewhere. The film follows its titular character after he discovers that his parents used to be porn stars. Bucky takes their history as inspiration and sets off for Hollywood, determined to find his own way to break into the industry.
This is my destiny. I was born to be a star.
It doesn't take long for Bucky to realize that his body doesn't exactly live up to adult film standards, but he finds his way to stardom despite anything that he's lacking. The problem with Bucky Larson might not be that it went too far with its lazy sex humor, but that it didn't go far enough with creating real characters or a story worth paying attention to. There are only so many small penis jokes someone can be expected to listen to, and Bucky Larson fills out more than a lifetime's quota. Darren Aronofsky has become synonymous with films that push boundaries. He isn't afraid to tell complicated stories or to present audiences with horrifying imagery that works to make the reality of his characters really hit home. It's a filmmaking strategy that's definitely earned him success, but one that's also sure to turn away plenty of viewers. Requiem for a Dream was Aronofsky's second film, and he had ambitious plans for it. The movie is an adaptation of a Hubert Selby Jr. novel, and the story centers on the lives of a group of addicts living in New York City. Sarah becomes addicted to amphetamines while trying to lose weight for a potential television appearance, while her son Harry and his friends use and deal heroin. The film uses split-screen segments and other editing techniques to disorient audiences and put them in the mindset of the movie's fractured characters. The bizarre and rapid editing is enough to make someone feel a bit queasy in certain moments, but it's the movie's depiction of needle injections, arm infections, violence, and sexual assault that really takes things over the top. The original cut of the film was rated NC-17, but even though the R-rated version cut down on some of the sexual content, the rest is still graphic enough to sicken an unprepared viewer. Oldboy is a 2003 South Korean film by director Park Chan-wook. Based on the Japanese manga of the same name, the movie follows a man named Oh Dae-soo, who's kidnapped and locked inside what amounts to a hotel room for 15 years. When he's suddenly released, Oh Dae-soo desperately begins looking for the truth behind his imprisonment and plotting revenge against the people who took him captive. By any measure, Oldboy is a fantastic film. It delivers a noir-styled story with some truly memorable fight scenes and a plot that keeps you guessing right up to the very end. However, critical acclaim and popular reception aside, the movie still goes too far, at least once. Some might find the big twist a bit on the gross side, but that's not the gross out moment that puts Oldboy over the top. The octopus eating scene takes place shortly after Oh Dae-soo is released from his prison. He shows up at a sushi restaurant and demands to eat something that's still alive. He proceeds to chow down on a live octopus, which lead actor Choi Min-sik really did. Creating the scene took 3 takes, and each time Min-sik crushed a live octopus between his teeth. Does the scene create a thematically resonant moment in the movie? Sure. Was it completely necessary? Almost definitely not. The very premise of 2009's The Human Centipede takes things so far that it's a wonder that the movie ever got made. For anyone who's missed more than a decade's worth of jokes about the film, here's a basic breakdown of the plot. Dr. Josef Haider is a retired surgeon turned psychopath who's become obsessed with using his medical skills to make obscene creatures. He kidnaps 3 tourists and sews them together in a line to form one continuous digestive tract. After that, Haider spends the rest of the movie continuing to torment the 3 as he trains his human centipede as a pet. Eventually, investigators stumble upon Haider's home, and a bloodbath brings the movie to its conclusion. The Human Centipede is nauseating to even think about, and watching it is no better. As we've already seen with other movies on this list, though, nausea-inducing shocks can take a movie pretty far. Horror movies often aim to make audiences uncomfortable, but it's a thin line between scaring an audience so badly they hide their eyes and showing them something so repulsive they're forced to look away from the screen. Hostel Part II found the line, poked it, then jumped right to the other side. The movie ran into problems well before it even made its way into theaters. The original theatrical poster had to be banned and replaced because it was too graphic. It simply featured a small bit of text overlaid on an image of chopped up bloody flesh. The replacement poster had an unclothed woman's body holding what is presumably her own severed head, so that one likely ran into issues at most theaters as well. The story, such as it is, follows a group of art students on vacation who unwittingly get auctioned off to a secret ring of wealthy torture fanatics. Scene after scene of nudity and torture play out, including graphic depictions of scalping, multiple beheadings, and severed genitalia being fed to dogs. Saw took the world by storm in 2004. Horror fans were intrigued by the film's grotesque premise and delighted by its sudden twist ending. A lot of the magic has to do with James Wan's directing, which might be why there's little magic or substance to be found in the sequels. When you start with a sadistic killer dishing out punishment via elaborate torture devices to anyone he deems deserving, it's hard to get much more disturbing. That didn't stop the Saw sequels from trying to up the ante, and even though the most squeamish of viewers stopped after the first film, Saw 3 is the one that finally took things too far. There are, of course, all the nightmarish traps that fans had come to expect from the franchise. A woman is ripped apart after fishing a key out of acid and still failing to escape, another is frozen to death, and a man is drowned in the ground-up remains of pigs. It's all nauseating stuff. But then the film goes on to include a surgery scene in which serial killer John Kramer has his skull drilled open to relieve pressure on his brain. The movie is just one miserable scene after another, presented with sloppy editing and a story that would send an audience right to sleep if it weren't for the constant onslaught of nightmarish imagery on screen. A movie doesn't have to be gross or crude to go too far. Sometimes a film just finds a way to pour gas on a fire that really needs to die down. In 1991, Oliver Stone released his political thriller JFK, starring Kevin Costner and Gary Oldman. The film begins with the investigation of Kennedy's assassination, which ends after Lee Harvey Oswald is killed. Years later, though, the investigation is reopened and a conspiracy tying the murders to members of the United States government itself is uncovered.
We're going back into the case, Lou. Murder of the president.
Conspiracy theories about the Kennedy assassination have been running rampant since 1963, and the most die-hard believers didn't need Stone to step in and reaffirm their suspicions. He decided to do it anyway, and JFK glorifies the kind of thinking that keeps new conspiracy theories popping up online every day. In case anyone thought that Stone had just made the poor decision to use real conspiracy theories as fodder for a big movie, he came back and released a documentary called JFK Revisited: Through the Looking Glass in 2021. It takes the same ideas at the heart of the original film's plot, but presents them as though they are definitive facts that Stone himself has uncovered.